Wanna see how it's done?
This is gonna be my canvas for the next month or so. It's I've done some prep work for this room, and now I'm gonna start sketching in the design, and then I'm gonna spackle all those areas that need to be flat so that it looks like a forest.
The first step in creating this mural was to flatten the surface, so for this I used drywall plaster or joint compound to fill in all the wood paneling. I marked in where the relief trees will go. These will be the foreground trees that will have physical texture and come out of the walls three-dimensionally. To fill in the panels, I really pushed in the plaster deep into the crevices to achieve full contact with the wall. This stage took a few days and a few coats. I got a white primer and one tinted black to be able to sketch and create some early value variations.
While I'm waiting for the drywall to dry, I'm gonna prime the window panes.
I primed everything that wasn't wet, the window frames, top of the wall and the ceiling.
About 3.5 days later, the room is all prepped up and ready to be primed. So I'm just gonna sketch in the design with the primer, kind of loosely, and see how it looks afterwards.
What I generally like to do is do the priming and the sketching in the design at the same time, akin to a grisaille method of painting that the great masters used to do when they were still alive. It's called an underpainting, aka underpants for your painting. After the priming comes the actual paint color. I wanted the sky to reflect a cold wintry light, infusing the whole scene. I mixed a light blue-gray that I will be using throughout the mural as the brightest highlight. I haven't used pure white at all in this mural. For the sky clouds, I mixed a dark blue-gray color. I thought it would be a good idea to use a roller for the ceiling. I alternated dipping my roller in the light paint, then mixed in the dark paint in order to create the look of a clouded night sky by blending wet on wet. My intention was to not make it too dark, because the overhead tree branches will need a relatively light background to contrast against. Then I painted the top part of the wall. There is a shelf/ledge there that created a bit of perspective challenge for the trees, but I made everything look normal from a specific point in the room, where everyone will be sitting for the most part. Then I mixed some more blues and white and black to make a grayed out blue as the mid-tone, although I never used this straight, just to blend in with the light or dark shades to give them more color. Then I started painting the background, horizon ground, using a blend of the lightest bluish gray that I used throughout the painting instead of white. It's the brightest color, but it's still not pure white. I wanted it to look as if there is light coming through the trees, with those distant trees fading right in the mist. I started by only painting the background strip, and then I changed my technique, deciding that painting the whole wall at a time would lead to a more flawless transition between the different depths of field. And then eventually, as I returned to the main wall that only had the background, I repainted some of that to make the transition look more natural. To create this immersive feeling of depth, you'll want to make the faraway layer smaller, less detailed, lighter, and with less contrast. In this case, the further away the trees are, the lighter and less detailed they become, as if disappearing in the creepy mist. The closer the trees, the darker they are, but also the highlights on them are brighter and more visible. The highlights and the shadows are interconnected, like the front and the back of a page, or the two ends of a magnet are positive and negative, or like the true nature of people. The highlighted side always faces the light source, in this case the moon above and slightly to the left. Thus, the highlight on the trees that are on the right of the moon will be on the left side of the tree, and the shadow will be directly opposed to the light, thus on the right. Later, I decided to add highlights and more detail to the trees in the mid-ground. They were looking like they needed a little more moonshine on their rough bark-covered sides. Then there was the painting of the sky. This took over a week to complete, with all the little branches and the moon. I varied the color values according to the distance of the trees, making the big foreground ones darker and longer to the center. As you can see, I took breaks from painting straight up the ceiling. It is quite straining for the neck. Maybe one day for a bigger project I'll get a scaffolding like Michelangelo, so I can lay on my back to paint. The only thing I'll have to look out for is paint dripping in my eyes. I used some tape to help me stay centered and make the trees all converge towards the middle. From the middle of the room, all the trees are continuous, and it really does look like you're laying on the forest floor looking straight up. It's pretty magical. Then I painted the moon, and I gave it a day or two to dry before I went and enhanced it with the aqua glow in the dark paint from Techno Glow. This paint absorbs and retains light and will glow even in the dark with no UV light. However, it does get super activated and charged under a UV light. At this point, the bas-relief trees are already 2-3 layers thick, and here I am adding the last and patterned layer. First, I smoothed out an even layer of joint compound with vertical strokes, then horizontal, then vertical again. Then, with the corner of my little plastic putty knife, I carved out lines, curves, and spirals to mimic a Tim Burton-esque tree bark pattern. These bas-relief trees needed 3 or 4 coats to achieve the desired thickness, and the compound had a couple of days to dry in between the applications to prevent excessive cracking. At the beginning of this project, I got a 4.5-gallon bucket, pretty heavy stuff, and I was wondering whether I was overestimating the amount of plaster that I needed. Actually, I ended up using 2 more 4.5 buckets after that. The relief trees and the wooden paneling devoured a lot of drywall, nearly 14 gallons. A couple of days later, after it dried completely, I smoothed out the sharp edges with my blade. Then, I primed the thirsty surface with a gray primer. This will help the paint be more vibrant and not get completely absorbed in by the plaster. I had the primer tinted by the Sherwin-Williams store guy because I thought it would be better for the dark paint to go on already dark background than a white one. Then I paint the trees using a 1-inch brush with stiff bristles so I could get the paint inside those crevices, creating a bit of gradient to give these trees some moonlight magic. The black paint is actually a slightly blue-black, 90% black and 10% blue. Then I use a dark gray, then a lighter color for the highlight. I mix the gradients wet on wet, thus achieving a smooth transition. I love wet on wet blending, but also, after this layer is fully dry, some lighter paint will be applied again in a dry brush fashion to give the bark a very cool, textured, rough look. The old man Led Zeppelin was the client's choice, as he actually had a very clear vision for what he wanted this room to look like, and this is a great thing for a commission artist. The artist always has a certain freedom of expression, but it's very helpful when the client has a solid, great concept and foundation. I certainly did my best to observe the careful folds of the old man's robe and sleeves, hood and face. I enjoy painting folds. I made his lamp glow in the dark using the same Techno Glow paint, to which I added some blue lit, glow in the dark pigment from Culture Hustle. Again, a very potent pigment, but one that glows in the dark, not just UV activated. His face and the lamp-facing facets of his robe are also glowing, to give it a full effect. I even dug out my airbrush out of the cockles of my dusty studio corner because I always love the soft, misty and glowy effects that it can achieve, even though it's always a bit to clean. The clogging isn't funny either, but if you learn how to take it apart completely, to clean it. It is a very useful and, I must say, needed skill when you use an airbrush, because it will clog no matter what you do. So I just got this new glow-in-the-dark paint from Wildfire Lighting. It's a luminescent clear color, fluorescent water-based. It's supposed to only show up in the black light, as opposed to the other paints which still retain some sort of glow during the day. This paint is supposed to be completely invisible. This better be good, because you think that I paid its weight in gold together with shipping, so let's see how it performs. Okay, maybe I didn't pay an arm and a leg for it, but it's certainly the most precious paint I've ever bought. And it took over a week to get to me. God, Amazon 2-day Prime got us so spoiled. Anyway, this paint is by far the best fluorescent paint I've ever used. It's not glow in the dark, just fluorescent. And its main feature is that it's transparent, so in a thin layer that you apply with a paintbrush or an airbrush, it's invisible during the day or night. But as soon as you turn on a UV lamp, it glows very brightly. It's very bright and pigmented and very sticky, meaning it dries very fast. So not very forgiving if you want to change a line or a shadow. And it takes a bit of stubborn scrubbing to pick up a drop that just dried, and it dries fast. Did I mention that it dries fast? Initially I thought that I would spray in the ghosts to give them that soft, airy and eerie feel, but airbrush mistakes are even more difficult to erase. So I decided to mark my ghosts by manual brush first, and I applied the airbrush glow effect afterwards. I started on the skulls too. It was really fun creating the skulls and bones, a bit of going back to my college anatomy lessons. I guess going to medical school was at least a little helpful in my career as an artist. I made sure to add the cast shadow made by the skulls and the bones. I also added the cast shadow by the trees, all according to how the moonlight shines on them, but I couldn't find that footage. After this visible acrylic paint was dried by a few hours, I gave the skulls and the bones some highlights with the fluorescent paint. I used a brush at first, then I softened the effects with the airbrush. Since I used the UV activated paints during the day, it was quite the challenge to see completely what I was doing. Next time I'll have to travel with some blackout curtains or hang some drop cloths over the window. I really enjoy the rainy days when it was so dark inside and only a bit of UV light was needed to see, but man, those sunny days it was so difficult to see what I was doing. Lesson learned. Isn't it nice that I'm always learning lessons? Never the same one too. There are so many lessons to be learned, never a shortage of lessons. The headless horseman was a bit of a challenge, as I haven't painted many horses in my time, especially with the added challenge of invisible paint. Pretty much everything went well until I finished the rider, and as I looked back, I saw how huge the back half of the horse was. So I spent a few minutes rubbing the paint off, and as I slowly gave up, I just ended up repainting over the horse's butt with the visible paint to redo his butt and tail so we can have a normal looking horse. The last step is adding some soft airbrush glows to the ghosts and the skulls, and then adding more skulls and bones and more ghosts. For this mural I used the combination of Sherwin-Williams Emerald latex paint combined with high quality acrylic mural paints from Golden. They have their own mural work paints. They're pretty good. Also, I had some mural paint from Chroma and Pebeo that I mixed in there. I do love working in a monochromatic color scheme. It eliminates the complication of color, and the value contrast is much easier for the eyes to absorb the full picture. Monochromatic aesthetics are also quite calming, I think. If you're wondering about my airbrush, I am using the humble Posh TG Talon double action gravity feed airbrush. It's a decent airbrush, I think. I do want to get another that I can do finer details, but this performed pretty well for what I needed here. And as I said, learning how to take an airbrush apart completely to clean is a needed skill when you use it, because it will clog no matter what you do. And at least for me, I still haven't found a paint or a method to avoid clogging. Just consistent and persistent cleaning works. This is my largest mural commission to date, and I don't want to brag, but it might be my best work yet. Well, an artist should always feel that their latest work is their best work, so that works. I estimated the project to take about a month, 4 weeks. In fact, it took roughly 6 weeks. I did encounter some hiccups in the journey, i.e. the drywall cracking all along the wood paneling patterns, deep, long, white cracks. At first, of course, after freaking out and just wishing I didn't exist so that my problems go away, first colored in the cracks with paint, and then I filled them in with a golden matte thickening paste, and that dries relatively transparent and matte. So I still ended up painting pretty much the whole forest over that, and that took some extra time. But getting to experiment with all these glow-in-the-dark and invisible fluorescent paints and pigments was an exciting and learning experience. This was my first time working with a Wildfire Lighting Invisible UV reactive paint. It's so incredibly pigmented and strong, certainly worth the investment and the perfect paint to use when you need a completely invisible paint that only gets activated by UV light. The one that I got was white, but they offer multiple color choices if you're interested. Now that I have a decent stash of various UV glow and fluorescent pigments and paints, I'll have to do some glow-in-the-dark art in the near future. You can drop me some ideas of what my next glow painting could be. My lovely clients have installed their blackout curtains and their couches and TV and black lights, fog lights and lava lamps, and they sent me these pictures. Then I went back and did a couple more things for them, and now their home theater is complete. For now. This mural has everything that you can desire in a rich, dark, gothic, eerie forest full room mural. It has depth, it has trees that come all the way to the ceiling, it has trees that come right out of the walls, it has skulls and bones and eerie, scary, glow-in-the-dark ghosts, fluorescent apparitions. Come with me and you'll be in a land of pure. What an amazing way to end the year. Many thanks to my clients and my patrons, and to you, lovely watcher. Season's greetings, and here's to a smooth new year.